actually a book that's compiled in the form of letters. And it's a letter after letter after letter that eventually became the chapters of this book. And it's all about advice. It's advice that a teacher is giving a student. So inshallah, Ustadh Fatima is going to start us off with kind of reflecting with us a little bit about just the importance of giving and taking advice from your mentors or mentees, kind of receiving advice, and how all of that works in benefiting us, inshallah, as young people. So let Fatima go ahead, inshallah, take it away.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما. So as Ustaz Safi mentioned, it's really awesome to be back. That's first and foremost. I missed you guys over the last couple of weeks. And also that we are taking this approach in studying a text and studying a book that a great scholar, that Ustaz Abdurrahman, he's going to go in more detail about the life of the scholar, had written. And this particular book, or this particular, is a letter really, that has been written is based off of a question. So his student comes to him, the student asks him a question, and he writes an entire book to answer his question. What's really interesting is that a lot of times what we've seen in our communities, and even here when we have Q&As and stuff like that, comes up a lot, is that sometimes it seems as if asking a question is looked down upon, or is not good. Like you shouldn't ask questions, you should just, just take what you get, right? But we see that in our tradition, actually, it's quite the opposite. That questions are actually encouraged, and seeking advice is a part of our tradition, is a part of our religion. You have where the Prophet ﷺ throughout his entire life, even though he's the Prophet, right? He's the Prophet ﷺ, throughout his lifetime, he's seeking advice on different matters. That he will constantly seek advice from Umar ibn Khattab, from Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, from matters that are big to matters that are small. And you have that a situation happens in the Battle of Uhud, and we talked about the Battle of Uhud a while ago, you guys probably forgot. But in the Battle of Uhud, a situation happens where, the people, they leave their posts. And afterwards, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Prophet that, alhamdulillah, like it's out of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy that you were lenient with them, that you were kind to them in the way that you talk to them. And eventually then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the Prophet a series of things to do. Tells him to seek forgiveness on their behalf, forgive them, seek forgiveness on their behalf. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, and consult them in the matter. Consult them, or where do we go from here? Because that was being a part of being like in the crowd. It was a part of being a part of the community. That the Prophet would consult with his community about matters when things came up. So it's very much so a part of our religion, and it's very much so a part of our tradition that we ask questions and we seek advice. There's a narration from the Prophet ﷺ where he says, ad-deenu nasiha. He says that the deen, meaning the religion, is nasiha. And some people translate it as advice, some people translate it as sincerity. And this hadith is focusing on the word an-nasiha. And it's saying that the Prophet was saying that the entire religion, the entirety of our religion, the entirety of our way of life is encompassed in the concept of nasiha. And that is the main pillar of the religion. And when you understand what nasiha means, then you're able to understand what the religion means. So you have here that nasiha actually, it has the meaning of someone who's seeking the best. Okay, it's someone who's seeking the best in terms of their intention of action. So if I'm coming and I'm asking you for nasiha, if I'm asking someone for nasiha, I'm seeking the best of what they know, right? And I'm not just asking for any reason, for just some random reason. I'm not asking because I think it's funny. I'm not asking because I think it's fun. I'm asking because I truly want that person's sincere advice. I want them to sincerely guide me. I want them to sincerely give me their opinion. So that's why the Prophet says, ad-deen nasiha, that the deen, the religion, is built in this sincere taking and asking of advice. Is built in this sincerity, this level of sincerity. So you have that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, He says that فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. That you should go and you should ask those who know if you do not know. And this was very frequent with the companions. The companions asked questions all the time. They ask questions all the time. And that's how we get a lot of our religion. Because you will hear in different classes where you're sitting down, you're learning about something, they say such and such companion came to the Prophet and asked the Prophet X, Y, and Z, and the Prophet gave this answer, this is how we have this rule. It's a part of our religion. They will constantly ask the Prophet. They will ask the Prophet about things like, Ya Rasulullah, tell me how do I become the best of people? Ya Rasulullah, tell me how do I get to Jannah? Ya Rasulullah, tell me how do I do this? They weren't shy in the way in asking questions, but they had an etiquette in the way in which they asked questions. There is an etiquette. There's an etiquette in everything that we do. So there is an etiquette, but there is not a dislike in asking questions. And what's interesting is that there could become a point where asking questions is actually considered to be something that's obligatory upon you, something you have to do. When it comes to matters of your religion, when it comes to matters of your practice. If you're having trouble understanding how to practice your religion properly, it is mandatory upon you to ask people that you know, that knows the answer, how you are to practice your religion. You don't just say, okay, I don't know, so I'm just not going to do it. No, that's not how it works. Now you have an obligation to yourself to ask a question. Now, is there a such thing as a bad question? Is there a such thing as a bad question? Let me tell you guys this story. There was a time when the Prophet ﷺ was giving a khutbah. He was advising some of the companions, he was talking to them. And he told them that they have to make Hajj. Okay? He told them that they have to make Hajj. And this companion, one of the companions a man gets up, and he says, Akullu amin ya Rasulullah? Do we have to make Hajj every single year, O Messenger of Allah? And the Prophet ﷺ did not say anything. So then this guy gets up a second time, and he says, Akullu amin ya Rasulullah? Do we have to make Hajj every single year, O Messenger of Allah? And the Prophet ﷺ does not say anything. He gets up a third time. You would think that he got the hint. 1 and 2. Because Prophet was not like that. He wasn't the type of person to ignore somebody. He wasn't that type of person. When you asked him a question, he would answer. But he would stay silent if he knew that it was something that would have been too difficult on you. So the Prophet did not say anything 2 times. So the guy gets up a third time, not getting the hint. You guys should pick up on hints and social cues. It's very important. Third time, not getting the hint. He says, Akullu amin ya Rasulullah? And then the Prophet tells him, Lo qultu na'am la wajabat. If I had said yes to you, it would have become mandatory upon me. If the Prophet was to answer and tell them yes, tell this guy yes, every single year you have to make Hajj, then what would that mean? That what we know of Hajj now to be once in your lifetime would have been what? Every year. So the scholars, what they say about this is they say that when you have enough information for you to be able to carry out the task that you need to carry out, you leave it at that. Don't make things more difficult on yourself. But when you need clarification, or you need to understand something, or you need to know something, then it's now your responsibility to make sure that you ask. This is how we find balance in our religion. That it gives us the liberties, and it gives us the liberties and the confidence to do what we need to do, but it gives us the balance so that we don't go overboard. How many times have you asked a question and you regretted asking that question because it made your life difficult? Like that one person in the classroom says, are you going to pick up the homework? It's like, excuse me, sir. It's always a boy, because the boys do their homework like one time, okay? They want to turn it in that one time. Are you going to pick up the homework? And everybody looks at that person like, are you kidding me? Or you did this the first time in like 10 years you did your homework, you're going to ask? You know? How many times have you asked a question and you're like, I shouldn't have asked that question because I wasn't ready for the answer? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that. He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, all you who believe, لا تسألوا عن أشياء إن تبد لكم تسؤكم. Don't ask, all you who believe, do not ask about things which, if you get the answer, is going to make you stressed out. It's going to be very difficult on you. It's not saying don't ask because you are lazy. Don't do that. Like, I'm not going to ask how to pray because I don't feel like praying. No, that's not what it's saying. It's saying that when you have enough information to carry out the task, you go and you carry out your task. When you're ready for more, then you ask for more. And so you have here, and now I'm going to transition to Ustad Rahman, you have here where Imam Ghazali's his student asks him a question. And the question that he's asking him is because he's ready for more. He's ready to take his studies to another level. And Imam Ghazali does not answer a question with a one-word answer. He answers it with a book. This is the definition of don't ask if you're not ready. And what does his student do? His student is going to take this advice very sincerely. So when you guys are going and you're asking people for advice, and you're seeking advice, you have to be ready to take the advice that you're seeking. Because I'm assuming you're going to people that are trusted. I'm assuming you're going to people that, knows you, that is not trying to mess you up, that wants the best for you, and that's why you're seeking advice from these people. You have to be ready to take that advice. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakallah khairan. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is a really interesting point about taking advice. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because how many of you feel uncomfortable asking for advice? How many of you are like totally comfortable asking for advice? It's fine. How many of you, it depends on the person that you're asking, right? Now, especially when it's someone who's close to you, like that might be easier than other times. But the people that are close to you may not be the ones who are best suited to give you the advice that you need. Safi and I are really close, but if I need medical advice, if I ask him, I'm not going to get the best advice, right? And likewise, if he needs advice on something that I don't know anything about, just because we're close and he's comfortable doesn't mean that he's going to get the best advice. So part of the difficulty in asking for advice is really there's two pieces. Number one is being able to admit that you don't know something. And this is like the primary challenge of everybody's nuts. Being able to say that I don't know. And the reason why it's difficult is because in your age, in the college age, and also in our environment in the West, not knowing something is equivalent to being a failure, right? Like your status is given to you based on the things that you know, even socially. Someone told me the other day, I made a reference to, as a joke to someone, to Kim and Kanye, and they're like, oh no, they're divorced. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, you didn't hear? And I was like, no. And they were like, wow, okay. And there was like a lot of judgment coming my way because I didn't know. Not knowing something is tantamount to failure, right? Like you failed in some way if you don't know, whether it's pop culture, whether it's, common knowledge. If you don't know something, you don't know. There's a race. I mean, the entire industry of journalism and news media is not a race about information, but it's a race against time. Who can put out information first, right? So there's a lot of pressure for everybody to act like they know. It kind of reminds me of my son, Musa. He's almost 4, and he's hilarious. No matter what, sorry, Musa, I didn't mean to make you look up. My son, Musa, not Fatima's brother Musa, my son Musa, no matter what you ask him, if you say, hey, do you know what this is? It doesn't matter what you say, he's going to say yes. Wallahi, it's so frustrating. My Musa, do you know where that is? He goes, yes. I go, where is it? He goes, where is it, Baba? I was like, you just said yes, right? And I don't know whether it's not, I'm trying to figure out why you say yes to everything, right? Musa, do you know what this is? Yeah. Okay, what is it? What is it? It's like talking to a parrot. It's so interesting. And I'm trying to figure out, like, is he actually pressed? Does he think he knows what it is and then he realized he doesn't? Or is there something innate inside of every human being, no matter how young or old, that they always kind of want to have the upper hand? They never want to be known to be ignorant of something. It's very humbling for a person to say, I don't know, right? Especially when it's something that you think everybody else already knows. So number one, in this giant, maze that we call life, one of the most challenging things about seeking advice is admitting that you don't know something. It's a very specific and a very rare kind of strength to admit that you don't know. Not everybody has it. Not everybody has built up that discipline and that strength that instead of saying 1% and acting like they know 100, there are people that you'll meet that they know 99% and they act like they know nothing. Right? And there's actually, what's the effect? Dunning-Kruger effect? Is that what it's called? You guys ever heard of that before? Anyone know what that is? The Dunning-Kruger effect? You guys should know. Anyone here like a psych major? Or you started a psych major before your parents told you to become a doctor? So, okay. The Dunning-Kruger effect, I believe that's how it's pronounced, is essentially this graph, this chart, that has two axes. Axis number one is how much you know about something. And axis number two is how much you think you know. And the line on this chart is actually not a straight line, but actually the more that you actually learn about something, the less you think you know about that thing. So earlier on, when you just started reading about something, you thought you knew everything, right? But then as you get into the level of like mastery and you start to read book after book or article after article, and then you get your hands dirty and you start actually doing it, right? Then after your experience is like 4, 5, 6 years with something, then you're like, man, I am nowhere near the best at this. I don't know what I'm talking about. When I first started, I thought I was the best. Now I'm learning that I'm not. And so it's a very painful realization. It's almost like ripping off a Band-Aid. It has to be done, but it's not fun. To admit that you don't know. I want everyone to say, I don't know. Guys, say, I don't know. It's a really uncomfortable thing to say. Like, a lot of people just don't like saying it. Right? If somebody tells you, like, hey, I don't know. Right? Just admitting, just pleading the fifth, I don't know. Right? Some of the scholars said that half of knowledge is la adri. Nisful ilm la adri. Like, half of Islamic knowledge is just saying, I don't know. Right? So being able to put yourself in that position, it feels in the beginning, before you say it, it feels like it's going to be humiliating, but it's actually very honoring. It honors you when you say that. A lot of people, and the people who are mature and who actually do know, they respect so much when they see people say, I don't know. So get comfortable saying that. Not in the wrong times. Hey, when are you going to be here? I don't know. All right? Don't use it for your convenience to like ruin something. I'm talking about if somebody asks you a question and there's implications to the answer, right? Better safe than sorry. I don't know. Let me go find out. I'll tell you tomorrow. Let me go ask some people. I'll figure it out for you, right? Is this haram? Instead of being like, yeah, for sure. Why? I don't know. It looks haram to me. Right? Is this halal? Yeah, absolutely. Really? Do you know that? Yeah, I think so. Taking that route. That's number one. Okay? Number two is that not knowing something doesn't mean that you're not smart. Isn't that crazy? Not knowing something doesn't mean you're not smart. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the smartest of all human beings, the most intelligent in every way. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him in the Quran, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. He says to seek counsel. Why do you seek counsel, guys? Because you don't know something. You seek people's opinions so that you can be better informed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet ﷺ, after the Battle of Uhud, which we talked about, Stella Fatima mentioned, to seek counsel. And there's one scholar, Imam Zarnuji, he says something really powerful about this moment. He says, wow, isn't it amazing that Allah is telling the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to go to people who don't know as much as him, who are not as intelligent as he is. And he's the one that's receiving revelation from the heavens, not them. Why would somebody who's smarter and receiving revelation from Allah, why would that person ever be put in a position where they have to ask someone else for information? Why? So Imam Zarnuji says, couldn't Allah have just given him the answer to every question? Isn't it possible? In fact, think about it. Wouldn't it have been part of his proof that he was a prophet? If the Prophet ﷺ never had to ask a question to anybody, if he knew the answer to everything, before he even asked it, if he knew, if God gave him that knowledge, wouldn't it be kind of amazing? Wouldn't it be like miraculous? And then if he says, I'm a prophet, wouldn't people be more inclined to believing that? What? Prove to us that you're a prophet. And he would say, I know the answer to everything. Every answer I've had is correct. I've never been wrong. It would be convincing. It's a convincing argument. But you know what's crazy? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't give him that. As much as that would be miraculous, you know what's even more miraculous? Is Allah teaching the Prophet ﷺ to teach us to be humble enough to ask. That's the true miracle. His character was the true miracle. Knowing everything, as miraculous as it sounds, not as miraculous as being the best in character. And part of being the best in character is being humble enough to ask. That's what Imam Zarnuji says. Beautiful point. So this book that we're going to talk about, okay, part of the reason why we're reading it is because it was written by somebody who's like you. Like he was a student of Imam Ghazali. He studied with him for many years. And at the sort of like conclusion of their studies, not really conclusion, but like in the advanced years, he basically writes Imam Ghazali a letter. And he tells him, you know, I've studied all this religion with you. I studied all this Islamic sciences with you. Can you please just write me back and tell me, give me like a good, like strong summary of this. Like, let me hear from you. What is the point? Like, what is the, not that he didn't believe, of course he believed, but he's like, I want to know the summary of all of this, because it's like learning everything. And then you're like, wait a minute, give me like the nectar, right? Give me like the sweet stuff. So Imam Ghazali, like Ustad Fatima mentioned, he's not just going to write back one letter. He wrote back a very long letter. It's a letter with different chapters. And each chapter starts with the phrase, Ayyuhal walad, al-muhib, oh my loving or beloved, either one, son. He's not actually his child, but he's addressing him with that softness. Because he wants him to know, right? Because number one, it's intimidating to ask somebody questions. He wants him to know what? That I'm looking out for you. Part of the reason why I'm answering these questions is because I have love for you, right? And what's cool about Imam Ghazali is that he himself went on a journey that required him to ask some questions himself. His background is very interesting. Imam Ghazali was born in the year 1058. Okay, so he's like 1,000 years from, right, today, almost 1,000 years from 2021, right, 900 so years, right? He was born in 1058 in a city called Tus. He's Persian. And from a very young age, his father, they were poor. His father passed away when he was very young, and he had a brother named Ahmed. And he and his brother were left in the care of some teachers, some Islamic teachers. And very quickly, Imam Ghazali, Abu Hamid, he quickly climbed the ranks. He was very intelligent, very smart. And he graduated from like reading Quran with his teacher and learning from the Imam of the city. And then he went from there to another city, Nishapur, Nesabur. And he studied with other teachers, and eventually he got to like the greatest teacher of the era, Imam al-Juwayni. They call him Imam al-Haramain, the Imam of the two Harams. And he was known to be like the greatest scholar of the time. So Imam Ghazali basically climbed the Forbes 500 list or whatnot, and then he made it to Google. Like, he was up there. Then from there, he was pulled into the court of the Nizam, the court of like the leader, the minister. He was basically brought into the leadership of the Ummah, of the Seljuk dynasty. And he was like his councilman for the leader. And then from there, he was made the dean of essentially what was like the Harvard of the time, the Nizamiyya. Okay? And this is all, by the way, you want to know how many years he lived? He was 53 when he died. So you can imagine this is all happening very quickly. And this all happened by the time he was about 30. I'm 33. Can you guys imagine if I walked in here and I gave you that resume? Like, yeah, I was an advisor. I was an Islamic advisor to like world governments, and I teach Islamic studies at, Azhar, and like, could you imagine just like or like Harvard? You'd be like, wow. So Imam Ghazali had that. And then what happened was very interesting. Okay? One day he just disappears. He just leaves. He told his family he was going to Hajj, and he was going to Hajj. He didn't lie. But he kind of went through a crisis, like a mini crisis of faith. He was a scholar. In fact, he was so knowledgeable that when he taught at the university, all of the chairs that were there for the students, by the time the students would arrive, all the chairs would be filled by who? Other professors. So he's a 30-year-old, 30-ish, 35 maybe, youngest professor, the dean, and all of his classes, there's no room for actual students. It's other scholars that are attending his classes. So all the students would come in and there'd be nowhere to sit, right? That's who he was. And then he just bounces. He just dips mysteriously. He tells his family he's going to Hajj, but what they didn't know was that actually he sold everything he had. If you go to Hajj, you don't have to sell everything. You leave some stuff, but you don't have to sell. He sold everything. And what he did from there was he made his little, he made his Hajj, and then he took a little detour. And he decided to spend time in Syria and in Palestine, in Quds. He actually spent 2 years in Quds, in Jerusalem. And he traveled across a little bit of the northern African region. And then he came back to Iran, modern-day Iraq. And he actually spent time in what was called, they call it the Uzla. He spent time in seclusion. Total seclusion. Okay? He basically went into spiritual hibernation. And you know how long he did that for? Almost 8 years. Almost 8 years. He traveled. Hajj took him about 2-3 years, that whole journey, about 2-3 years. And he stayed away from people for about 8 more years after that. Why did he stay away from people? Why? So interesting, right? At the top of your success, at the top of everything that you've worked so hard at, you just vanish for over 10 years. Can you imagine doing that? And he talks about the reason why he did. He has a book that he wrote, an autobiography, called Munqidh min al-Dalal, Deliverance from Error. It's his autobiography. He writes about how when he was climbing that ladder, there was something that was happening internally within him. He talks about it. He says, I was extremely knowledgeable. I knew all the sciences. I was super sharp. I could recite everything from memory. I was this. But my heart was not content with my faith. I was not content with where I was. I was not content with my relationship with Allah. And I realized, you guys ever heard of imposter syndrome? He's like, I realized that I was kind of bordering on this being an imposter. That I was up there lecturing everybody about religion and what Allah says and what His Messenger says and Shafi'i fiqh and et cetera, but I actually knew nothing about my own spiritual state. So he dipped, and he left, and didn't come back. And he only ended up coming back after this seclusion at the begging of the leadership of the time to come back and take his post. Now, during this time, these 8, 9, 10, 11 years, is when he wrote all of his books. You know, he wrote I'm talking like over 40, 50 volumes of books. So he wrote all of this, and his entire purpose of writing and his entire life was dedicated to one title of one book that he had, Ihya Ulumuddin. He felt like he wanted to revive the religious sciences. He felt like religion became like a cocktail party conversation. Who could flex the most? Who knew the most? Who could answer these deep philosophical questions the most? It's kind of like TikTok, like who can get the most likes, who can get the most shares, who can get the most follows. I mean, this problem of the most is going to plague humanity from day one to now, right? Different words, but the same concept. So he felt like everybody was just chasing popularity and fame and money. And he was surrounded by Muslims who were doing this, and he felt like he was slipping into that. And so he decided to leave all of that and find sincerity. That's what he wanted. So when his student writes in this letter, his student is kind of asking him, "Oh, Sheikh, can you tell me what it is that you found on that journey? You know, you left for so long. You went to go find your faith. Can you tell me what it is that you found?" And Imam Ghazali gives him 23 letters back. He writes a letter with 23 different sections. They're short, but he tells him, "This is what I found." And that's what we're going to read together, inshallah. You're going to be able to know what it is that he spent 10 years looking for. We're going to cover that this year, inshallah. And the reason why we chose this is because this is you may not be gone for 10 years, but many of you will probably relate very much to what Imam Ghazali did. He wanted to find out why he believed in Islam. He didn't just want to believe in it, he wanted to know why. And he wanted to explore that in a way that was super meaningful and very authentic to him. Not because he was famous, not because he was good at it, not because he was already the top, right? These aren't reasons to be Muslim. So when you ask yourself, why am I Muslim? Many of you say, oh, because I believe in it. But how many of us, one of the reasons that's dangerously close to the top is because I was born Muslim? Ask yourself this, if you weren't born Muslim, would you have converted? Right? We want that answer to be, yes, absolutely. But how would I know unless I knew why I was Muslim in the first place? So Imam Ghazali went on his own journey to find out. And it was beautiful what he came back with. So inshallah, we'll open up to some Q&A right now. But we are going to start with reading the book next week. And we're going to try to get a hold of the book for everybody. That way you're not just listening to us. You guys can actually have a piece of paper or a notebook in your hand with the book. And you can write down some thoughts. You know, if Stada Fatima says something that really, blows your mind, you can write it down. Okay? And this book is going to be very powerful. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite books, alhamdulillah. So I'm happy to be sharing with you guys. Inshallah. We'll go ahead and take a few questions now before we wrap up. And then we have some snacks and refreshments for y'all, inshallah, on the way out. Anyone got any questions? For myself or Safi or Fatima? Anyone? Yep. So the reception, it wasn't a public book. So the question is how was it received? It wasn't like a public book. It was actually like a memoir that he wrote. But it's not a very scholarly book. You're not going to find really any, technical language in it. It's not like he's breaking down issues. It's a very heartfelt, reflective book. When you read it, you kind of feel like, man, he's just kind of giving it to you straight. He's not trying to, He's not trying to show off. He's not trying to give you a textbook. He just wants, this is just good advice, you know? So that's the kind of vibe that you get when you read it. Versus the Ihya, which is like, you know, it has a lot of technicality to it, has a lot of technical language in it, and it's very long. This book is the exact opposite of all of that. So, and again, there's a need for both kinds of texts. Yeah. Anyone else? Questions about this or anything else? If anyone has any questions about anything else, you can ask, inshallah. Yeah.
I know we were talking about how important it is to ask for advice and it shows that like you're humble and stuff, but I guess what a lot of us might want to know is like how would you go about asking advice from someone when you're someone who doesn't usually ask for advice?
How do you ask for advice when you are somebody who doesn't usually ask for advice? As you know, as with anything, you have to start somewhere. You know, it's like saying like, how do you start working out if you're not somebody who works out? You know, the reality is like, you just have to start, and when you start, then it'll kind of get there. So what I'll tell you guys a funny story. This is broadcasted, but it's not my personal account, so my mom is not watching. Okay, so the other day, I was reading and preparing for I was reading some tafsir in Arabic, some different Arabic books. And my mom, you know, she's Egyptian, she speaks Arabic, she reads Arabic, and she reads tafsir for fun. That's kind of like her thing, for fun. She reads tafsir for fun. So I thought to myself, you know, let me call her and let me sort of like engage with her on this tafsir and kind of like, you know, talk to her about it, maybe ask her some questions, even though I'm pretty sure I know the answer, right? But let me try to do that with her, you know? Have you guys ever done that before with your parents? Like ask them to help you with something you didn't need help with? Anybody? Really good tip, by the way. If you're trying to build that relationship, really good tip is just ask for help even though you don't really need it, right? And then make sure you do it the way they're saying. So I call my mom and I'm like, hey mama, like I'm reading tafsir of this surah. You know, I wanted to ask you, mama, like this part, you know, he says, and then I read the part to her. And I said, you know, is that what I think it is? Like, is it this, you know, kind of trying to engage her? And I knew exactly what the author was saying. And what does she do is that she responds with a 16-minute WhatsApp voice message where she's like, I'm gonna pray, I'm gonna break my fast, I'm gonna pray Maghrib, and then I'll get the tafsir and I'll read it to you and I'll explain it to you. Mind you, like, I didn't need that, right? Like I already read it, but she wanted to do that, okay? So I had to kind of get over my arrogance. Like I saw that 16-minute voice note and I'm like, oh my God. And mind you, I just got done reading the chapter, so everything she's reading, I already read it. But she thinks like, you know, Miskeen, this like, you know, half-white kid doesn't understand Arabic well enough, like he needs my help and, you know, this like kind of stuff. So she read it, she literally, you're gonna laugh, Fatima, she actually read the tafsir line by line and translated it. Line by line, literally for 16 minutes. And I listened to the whole thing, even though I knew exactly what she was gonna say. And at the end, what did I do? What do you guys, what should a son do at that point? What's the right move? There you go, you know it, just say thank you. I could have said, Mama, I already know this, right? I'm 4 minutes in, I'm like, Mom, I just finished reading that. You don't have to, right? But that would have been an arrogant moment for me, right? So humility actually is not whether or not you know or don't know. Oh, if I don't know, I'll be humble. If I know, then I can flex. No, humility is just being like, even if I know, I'm going to still listen. Because what? Because reminders are beneficial too. So maybe when she reads it, she's going to have something that I didn't catch. And what's the harm in me hearing it again? So to answer your question, Myra, I think, you know, the real issue is Myra, right? Mariam, sorry. To answer your question, Mariam, the hardest step is just starting to ask questions, even if you don't know the answers. Even if you know, I'm sorry. Not in an annoying way, but in a way that shows that, you know what, I don't have to know everything. I can ask. Yeah, so just start small, inshallah. That's what I would recommend. Yeah. Anybody else got any questions? That was a good one. Anyone else? Yeah.
Okay,
Your
so
problem.
let's say, kind of like advice, as well. So let's say, I don't know, like someone gives you an advice, and taking that advice makes you frustrated in a way, and understanding like you don't like that advice, but at the same time you kind of know that advice is right, but you just don't know how to cope with that like frustration of knowing that you don't want to take that advice, but yet you kind of know it's right. You know what I mean? So like, how do you kind of cope with that? It's you know, kind of like emotional state, I guess.
Yeah, so there's two things to that. The first thing is it's so important to figure out why that bothers you so much, the advice that's given. Because sometimes we like the advice, but we don't like the person that gave the advice, right? So sometimes you get advice from somebody and you're like, I know this is the thing that I should do, but I don't want to do it. And it's not even about the advice itself, it's about the person. You may not like that person, or you may feel like that person always has something to say, and that is a humbling moment for you in the sense that just because you may not care for somebody, or just because and care for somebody, I mean, like in the sense that I don't like them for being nice about it, just because that's how you have a feeling, those feelings towards that person, it doesn't mean that if they give you good advice, you don't take it. Okay, so that's like a big humbling moment. The second thing is that when it comes to things that we know are good for us, that we should do, it's very difficult to fight your nafs. It's a common thing in the sense that our nafs is something that we are striving or we're working against our entire life. So you will have that, for example, you know that you're supposed to pray. You know it. It's like fact. You know what I'm saying? You know that you have to pray. But for some reason, maybe there's that one prayer that every single time it's time to make that prayer, there's something that comes up. Or you're too tired. Or you're too frustrated. Or you're too this. Or you're too that. There's always an excuse that seems so valid to you. That's your nafs convincing you not to do that. So it may be sometimes where you have gotten advice from somebody about something that's maybe very difficult, about something that maybe is like you're like, oh, you may have went into that conversation, hoping that that person would tell you what you wanted to hear, and they didn't. They told you the truth and how you're supposed to deal with that situation, and that's going completely against your nafs. It's going completely against the part of you that doesn't want you to be great. And so you have to muster up the strength, as difficult as it may be, as annoyed as you may feel, and push through that. You have to push through it. Because you're saying that I know this is good for me. When you know that something is good for you, you have to do it. You have to push through and do it. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Yes, I'm the one up here asking if anybody has any other questions. Yes.
So on the other side of that, what if there's someone that you know that's constantly doing something wrong, and you're constantly trying to tell them the better way of doing it, or just the better way of going about something, and they just constantly don't want to take that advice? Do we have to keep, as like listeners, do we have to keep pushing that, like constantly commenting like you should be doing this, you should do this, or is it okay to give up on a person? Do you see that really?
There's a balance. There's a balance. It's not necessarily giving up on somebody, it's being balanced. So for instance, there was a companion of the Prophet, who had a drinking problem. And obviously the Prophet would advise him that he should not drink. Like the Prophet was not hanging out with him going like, oh yeah, you want to drink? Go ahead, I'll just wait out here. Like, no. He will obviously advise him that he should not drink. And the guy had received like punishment for his public drinking, his public intoxication. So when it came time for the punishment to come, meaning like they would basically they had different consequences for different actions. So when the time for the punishment came, another companion came up and they started to curse him, like, may the curse of God be on you. And the Prophet said, no, you can't do that, because this person believes in Allah and he believes in Allah's messenger. Now, when the companion who had a drinking problem, when he wasn't around for a long time, the Prophet would say, I miss him. Like, where is he? Somebody go find him from. He was a funny guy. He used to tell jokes. The Prophet enjoyed his company. You can enjoy the company of your friends even if they're not taking your advice. Your responsibility is to always be true and to be honest to them. But it doesn't mean that you nag. It doesn't mean that you're always nagging. It doesn't mean that, because people sometimes need time too. You give them advice, you let them know that this is the right thing to do, or what you're doing is not okay, and you give them time to process. You give them time to be able to implement that. And when they come to you, you are definitely honest. Like, definitely be honest. But don't make it that every time you see somebody, you're like, you're supposed to be doing this, you're supposed to be doing this, you're supposed to be doing this. Then it makes that person uncomfortable to be around you. Because now it's kind of like every single time I come to you, you tell me something I'm doing wrong. And that's not like a nice feeling. So you had a conversation about it once or twice. And also when they come to you, you are very honest in your advice that you give to them, then that's fine, you've done your part. Now it's time for them to take on that advice. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
Something I like that on something like along the lines of what she was asking about. I think there's a lot of times we have, I mean, for me, sometimes asking for advice, like someone will ask me for advice or something, and it's very like I'm doing my advice or say something that works for me, but not like they don't necessarily like listen per se, meaning they don't take action themselves. I think it becomes toxic when that person constantly comes back to you and you give them the same advice over and over again, and it just emotionally drains you, I think. So for me personally, I think you have to ask them that what are you going to do for yourself instead of giving them advice all the time. They're not listening to it. They kind of have to hear it from themselves. Like, okay, I'm going to start taking this kind of action. So I don't know if that helps anything, but I think, but from my experience,
But that's the beauty of friendships, right? Like, that's the beauty of friendships, mentorships, things of that nature, is that you have a relationship with the person in some capacity, right? And so sometimes when somebody comes to you, I know, for example, with friends, it's very possible that your friends do not want your advice. Like, they're coming to you to vent. Like, some of my friends will tell me, I understand that you have a lot of opinions. I don't want it right now. I just want to vent to you. And I'm the type of person, I'm still going to give you my opinion, but it's going to be later. I understand what you need from me at this moment. But if you say something wrong, I'm going to tell you. It just may be later on. It may not be right there in that moment. So having intelligence, like social intelligence, what's it called?
So emotional,
Emotional,
social
and emotional intelligence is very important. Recognizing the situation, recognizing the person who's coming to you, and realizing what are their patterns, what are their habits. For me too, I know it's not a friend. Like when someone comes and asks the same question over and over again, then at some point you do have to ask them, like, what do you want? What do you want? What are you trying to get out of this conversation? Okay, are you being on, or do you want me to be honest with you? Or are you coming to me because you want me to tell you what you want to hear? Because if you're coming to me to tell you what you want to hear, you came to the wrong person. It's fine. It's okay to have those nice, clear, honest conversations. You don't have to be rude about it. But you see that the person's coming over and over and they're asking you, what should I do? And you're giving the same advice over and over again, it's not okay. Or maybe I can refer you to somebody else that you could possibly listen to, because maybe I'm not the right person for you to be asking. So yeah. Any questions? Yes.
So I know that it's not associated with freedom transfer and I found my best involved in that sometimes they just get too close to me, backfire, and it could be not hard to contain your emotions and treat them with respect. So how can you do this all the time?
I will say this: it's not easy. There's no quick solution to this. When your parents or anybody that you should respect, so parents, teachers, elder siblings, the people at work that are maybe superior in their position, it's not easy. Part of it has to do with you could be right and not have to win an argument. I think the one of the greater lessons from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is that there's actually a reward for somebody who's able to swallow their pride and to take the L, basically to concede the argument. the Prophet ﷺ said that there's a palace promised in the center of paradise for the one who gives up arguing even when they know they're right. That last part's kind of cool, like even when they know they're right. So when you're in like a heated conversation, what ends up being the problem when you and your parents disagree. And this is something, by the way, that's documented in the Quran. Ibrahim alayhi salam with his father, okay? The brothers of Yusuf with their father. You have examples of people, Prophet Nuh with his son. You have examples of prophets, whether they were on the side of being the child or being the parent, where they showed like disagreement, right? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do that? Why did he show us that? Well, in part to show us that it's normal, it's natural. It's not something that makes you bad or makes you strange to have a disagreement with your parents. If prophets had disagreements with their parents or with their children, then that means that it's going to happen to you, right? As a parent, it's going to happen to you. As a child, it's going to happen to you. What we have to do, though, is look at how the prophets handled it, how they did not handle it, and how they did handle it. So you see, for example, that Yaqub alayhi salam, he knows his sons are lying. He knows they're lying, right? When his sons say that a wolf came and ate Yusuf, he knows that that's not true, okay? And there's different narrations that explain why he knew, right? Part of it was that, the shirt was really cleanly cut. There was a lot of different things, but he knew, he was aware. But he didn't just blatantly outright call his kids like, you guys are all, horrible liars and I hate you now and you got rid of my son and how will I ever forgive you? He just complained to Allah. So Allah in the Quran is advising parents that, look, sometimes your kids are going to do things that you're really going to hate and you know that they're lying. But it's not always the right move to blow up your kid's spot when they're lying, right? So sometimes as a parent, you have to play the long game. Now, as a son, we learn from Ibrahim alayhi salam a very similar lesson. He's arguing with his father, and this isn't a matter of debate, by the way, where it's good points on both sides. No, his father was worshiping idols, right? In some interpretations, an uncle, but either way, a father figure was worshiping idols. So what does Ibrahim alayhi salam do? Ibrahim alayhi salam is arguing, and then eventually he just concedes. He doesn't tell him that, okay, you can, worshiping idols is fine, let's do it. He just says to him, look, I've made my point, you're not accepting it, I don't want this to escalate any further, I'm just going to make dua now. That's my course of action from here is make dua. So in the Quran, we are taught that you are allowed to have conversation. You should be able to have conversation. But at the end of the day, if it's brick wall versus brick wall, there's no point in trying to, combust the other person or yourself. And you have to learn really what battles are worth fighting and what battles are not worth fighting. Right? Again, is that easy? No, it's not. It's like the existential crisis of every young person in college. It's like, what battle do I pick with my parents? And by the way, some parents are going to be different. Your mom might have certain battles that your dad doesn't care about. Your dad might have battles that your mom doesn't care about. Right? So you have to kind of be, and this is all about developing intelligence. Now, let me finish this off with one thing. Why? Why does it matter? It matters because when you develop this kind of skill at a young age, guess where that helps you? Helps you later with your own family. Exactly, with your spouse and your kids and your friends and your coworkers and life. And you find that people who are not able to manage their relationships early on in life are not able to manage them later on in life. Right? If they weren't able to manage disagreements with their siblings or their parents or whatnot, guess what? They are horrible people later on in life too. They got to figure out it eventually, and sometimes it's really late. So all of this is not for nothing, is what I'm trying to tell you. It's not like, oh man, I just got to live with my parents and like there's got to be these really hurtful moments where they might say things. No, you're gaining from that, even if you don't realize it. Now, is there a time where maybe when things are kind of calmed down, you can go and address that? Yeah, there's a time. But you know better than I do, right? You know your parents better than I do, and you know how to approach them with that. If they said something or did something that was hurtful, maybe at that time when things are explosive, it's not the right time to say something, but later on, you can approach them with that. But I just want everyone to know that these tensions, these disagreements, if they exist or when they exist, it's like Allah tells Musa, it's all part of your preparation. And later in life, you're going to be like, oh my God, like I know exactly why Allah put me through that. Those moments will be revealed very, very, very apparently, very clearly.
We're gonna go ahead and take one more question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No worries.
So if you're having trouble concentrating in prayer, should you be like repeating your prayer, or if you're halfway through realize like I just kind of blew through it all? Should you be repeating it from the start, or can you just like no?
Perfecting prayer.
Oh,
That's what I'm doing.
so the question is like, if you blew through it, should you repeat it? Sorry, who's asking?
Yeah.
You okay? First of all, that's a really good question. Secondly, yes. Third, it doesn't mean that your first prayer didn't matter or didn't count. But if you have time and ability, you can always, better that prayer than your first one be your nafil prayer. What I would advise though is that it can be a slippery slope because you're never really going to pray the perfect prayer, right? You will have some prayers that are better than others. What I would say is you need to give yourself a threshold of what is a good quality salah to you, right? What's a threshold? For some people it's time, for some people it's a level of focus, but you need to grade yourself. As long as you've accomplished that grade, then don't repray it. But if you know that, it's the second rak'ah and I'm still thinking about like what I'm gonna eat for dinner, or like what, my friend said to me, or like that hilarious TikTok that I saw, or whatever, and that, I haven't really been present at all throughout this, then it might be the better thing to do for you to end your prayer, maybe even make wudu, and go and refresh your wudu and pray again, right? Just to kind of give yourself that. And ask yourself why you're being distracted in the first place. A lot of times a bad prayer can be saved with just a little bit of preparation. And when I say a little bit, I mean like 60 seconds. How many of y'all have ever stood up to pray and then quickly sat down before you prayed for a minute just to clear your mind? Isn't that what people do when they're like nervous or about to do something really, really serious? Don't they like give themselves a minute just to breathe? So imagine if you treated the other things in your life that were very important with the same level of care that we do with salah. We'd be pretty much bad at everything. So that's why Imam Ghazali, when he writes in his book, like The Secrets of Prayer, one of the things he says is like, pick a good spot to pray. Pick a good time to pray. Don't pray in an area where you're going to be distracted. Pick in an area that's clean, that smells nice. Do you need to use the bathroom? Are you hungry? Like, there's all these questions that you have to go through. And as long as you answered them reasonably well, you should be able to have good salah.
All right, Jazakallah khairan, everybody. We're gonna go ahead and end here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, and we will see you guys all next week, inshallah, next Thursday at 7:30. Oh, if we can all fold the chairs and just put them all on the side. Clearly, I'm not used to doing this.